All right, guys, our guest today is a believer and advocate for the transformative power of movement. He was very active as a kid until the age of 13 when he was diagnosed with a bone cancer in his right hip. In total, he spent around 3 years in and out of hospital. And despite enduring chemotherapy and over 20 surgeries, his right hip had to be removed. The realization of not being able to move the way he used to hit him hard. He endured serious depression and felt isolated from his peers. At the age of 16, he took up wheelchair tennis. He represented Australia numerous times on the world stage, including at 2 Summer Paralympics. He was ranked Australia's #1 wheelchair tennis champion and #8 in the world before retiring. Outside of his athletic accomplishments, he has also embarked on a deep journey of self-reflection. He conquered the Kokoda Track, a gruelling trek of more than 140 kilometers on foot. He has also delved into a depth of meditative and spiritual practice as a Qi Gong instructor and a student of traditional Chinese medicine. So with that, I'd like to welcome onto the show, Adam Kellerman. Welcome, brother.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
It's very nice to have you here, Adam. And Les has given us, I guess, a short synopsis of, some events in your life, some achievements that you've had today. But what we'd love to do is invite you to tell us your origin story, as far back as you'd like to go. We'd love to open the floor to you and hear all about your life leading up to this point. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Shaun. As far back as I like. Well, I grew up in Sydney, Australia, and yeah, I have 3 brothers, and they were pretty active kids, and that was the majority of my childhood memories revolve around sport. I went to school and did other activities, but my true passion in life was soccer, and my dream as a child was to be play soccer for Australia. And so when I was diagnosed with cancer, it was, a shattering of that dream, and turned my life upside down. So I was actually on the soccer field, running up the field one day, and I had just taken a goal kick. I was on one side of the field, and we moved the ball up quick, and I got a corner kick, and I was the corner kick taker. So they called me to go run, and all of a sudden this pain struck my right hip, and I could hardly move. I got taken off the field. I had a little bit of intermittent pain leading up to that point, but nothing like what happened on that day. And so the next day I went to a physio who saw that the muscle in my leg was malformed and had shrunk. So there was muscle wastage. And she, speaking to her many years later, it was like her heart dropped at that time. And she sent me for an X-ray, which showed that the texture of the bone, which is meant to be quite smooth, had these lines in, and so they could tell that something wasn't quite right. And then I went for an MRI. After the MRI, the radiologist pulled my mum and I into the back room, and we were looking at the screen, and on the screen was a tumor about the size of a tennis ball. And I had no idea what a tumor was. I didn't even know what cancer was at that time, but mum started crying, and so I was naturally pretty scared and concerned. I had no idea the journey that was about to unfold, but there was I know, like, steps. First finding out what's the tumor. Was it benign? Was it malignant? And so I had a bone biopsy where they stuck a big needle into my hip and took out a sample, and sure enough, it came back as a bone cancer called Ewing sarcoma. And so it's a type of bone cancer. It's not too common, but in the cases that it happens to, it's more common in teenage boys for some reason. And yeah, so that's when I saw a orthopedic surgeon and an oncologist, and my journey in the hospital system really started. And like Leslie said, it was a 3-year journey. It was meant to be a year. So the plan was for 4 rounds of chemotherapy, which would alternate 3 days in hospital receiving chemotherapy and then about 3 weeks to recover, and then 6 days in and about 3 weeks to recover. And that process was, at the beginning, it wasn't too bad, but each round of chemo was like I got the life force in me got more drained, and I got more sick. After the 4 rounds, I had some time off to recover for a major operation where they removed the bones of my right hip, literally took it across the road to be irradiated, and then brought the bones, some of them back, to put back into my hip with a partial hip replacement with lots of bolts and screws to hold it all together. And the idea of that was to give me a structure of the pelvis. And 5 years earlier, they would have removed all the bones and then just left it like that. But this was a newer operation that was had a lot of success. But in my case, I contracted an infection, post-surgical infection, which they managed to treat, and we thought it was all good. And then I had 10 rounds of chemo planned afterwards. And so, as I said, the 4, each time I got slightly worse. And that was before I had surgery. After the surgery, I was already, pretty weak, and they just smashed me with chemo, which children recover a lot quicker from chemo than adults. But there's some pictures that I look back on, and I look like a ghost, just no life force left, and I was in pain, recovering, had to relearn how to walk. The 6 weeks in 6 weeks recovery after the major operation was easily the hardest time of my life. And I actually had suicidal contemplations and ideations, because, as you can imagine, going from being a sporty kid, sport being my life, to 6 weeks not being able to get up to go to the toilet. So that was, a bit challenging in so many ways. So the 10 rounds of chemo, on the 9th one, the infection came back. And so it was like almost at the finish line, and then basically had to go back in for surgery, where the hip replacement that they put in was taken out, and they put in a cement block infused with antibiotics to try and get rid of the infections, and then keep the space open so they could put a hip back in. They tried 2 different antibiotics and 2 different cement blocks, and nothing worked. And there were lots of operations around this time, and it was all over 2 years while I was in and out of hospital receiving IV antibiotics as well. My family even managed we I don't know how, I think maybe it was afterwards, still on IV antibiotics when we went on a family holiday overseas. So all in all, it was 3 years, and at the end they removed all the bones in my right hip. And so what they would have done 5 years earlier, because the newer operation didn't exist, at the end of 3 years they left me with that, and the remaining femur moved up into scar tissue and created what they call a false joint. And that's what I've been walking on ever since. So that was 2006. I was 16 years old, and now I'm 30. And so movement, learning how to move, learning how to walk multiple times in those 3 years, and dealing with chronic pain for many years after that. I was quite young when I got off all painkillers because of how they made me feel mentally. Like, they slowed me down and numbed my senses, and which I'm very grateful that I had the wisdom at that age to just be like, no, it's not serving me. Same with antidepressants. I was on them for a little while, but it didn't help me feel more alive. It felt like it was taking away part of myself. And but when like there was so much repressed emotion at that time, because when you're fighting for your life, it's a very physical pursuit. And so I was extremely lucky that my parents, who were by my side the whole time, I had the support of an amazing family and community around me. And my parents one day asked me, they kept trying to get me to do some extracurricular activities to bring out my, find something that I was interested in again, because after that I just felt like life wasn't really worth living. And that's when they took me to try wheelchair tennis. And from the first time I sat in that wheelchair, I could hardly move the chair. But something about being on the tennis court, on the racket, trying to hit the ball, trying to achieve something, it brought my spirit back to life. There was a spark that had been put out from the cancer, and yeah, I knew from that moment, it's like, okay, there's something I've got to live for. And from there, I started training. 6 months after I started training, I went to an Australian junior camp and won my spot on the Australian junior team, and went to compete in Poland and Sweden, where I saw the best players in the world. And that's where I set my mind to joining them and committing myself to being the best athlete I could be. I knew it wasn't, my dream as a child to be on the Australian soccer team, but being on the Australian wheelchair tennis team brought out the same competitive animal that was living inside me. That it was a way to express that. And I mean, I could spend a long time talking about the highs and lows of my career. There were many. I spent 10 years traveling the world, meeting all kinds of people. And, I played tournaments on 6 continents. The 2 Paralympics I went to was 2012 in London and 2016 in Rio. And Rio, I almost didn't make it. It's actually leading up to Rio, I reached my career high ranking of 8 in the world. And the very next week, I injured my right shoulder. So there was a setback. It was about a year earlier that I started working with a movement coach, and we started unraveling the pain, the chronic pain that I was in. So it's probably important to say that during 2010 to 2017, I used a wheelchair to walk any distance further than about 100 meters. Around my house and very short distances, I walked with a walking stick, but any further than that it was just too excruciating. And so I was actually, when I started training for Kokoda, it was because I was actually in Africa doing some charity work, donating tennis wheelchairs and tennis equipment, when another man who was very involved in different charities, he actually approached me and asked me, he saw that I could walk, but could also see that I was in a wheelchair. And I don't know what was going through his mind, but he came over to me and asked me if I wanted to walk the Kokoda Track and raise money for charity. And the feeling in my body and my mind went in completely different directions. My mind was like, what the fuck is this guy thinking? And my body was like, yes. It was just like this sign of like this spirit was like, yes, you need to do this. And so when I got back from Africa, I put my wheelchair in storage, and I haven't sat in it since. That was in July 2017. So I started walking, trained for a year and a half, raised $56,000 for youth off the streets, so supporting misplaced youth around Australia. And when I got back from Kokoda, which we finished in November 2019, I was planning on getting back in the wheelchair and starting to train for the Tokyo Paralympics. I'd set my mind, okay, that was the progression. But when I got back in the wheelchair and started training, so my tennis wheelchair, not my everyday wheelchair, the spark was gone. And so I went one day and it was training. I was just like, yeah, it's not feeling right. And I went the next day and I felt totally flat and disinterested, wasn't enjoying the environment that I was in. And it was clear to me that there was something else. And so the next day, day 3, I went in. We actually had a meeting, the Australian team, and planning and preparation for Tokyo Paralympics, which was meant to be last year, but now it's happening this year. And I retired. I said, I need to say something before we get started. I'm done. And the night after I retired, I had the first anxiety attack of my life, as I felt like my identity that had been wrapped up as a professional athlete, it was really freaking out. And luckily I had enough meditation and mindfulness experience where I could observe the anxiety attack without being dragged through it. But the 2 years from so it was about just over 2 years ago that happened, beginning in 2019. Yeah, I may have messed up some dates. So the 2 years, 2019 and 20, I spent most of the time questioning, reflecting. I also did a training with a Qi Gong master. And so I spent a lot of time training Qi Gong and meditating and reflecting on my life. And then I settled on studying Chinese medicine and acupuncture just because of the love and passion that I have for Qi Gong and the art of energy medicine. So that basically brings us up to the present moment, where I've spent the last few months really in books, studying and dedicating myself in a new way, which has brought its own challenges. And yeah.
Thanks for sharing, man. And look, it's such an incredible story. You know, I've heard a very short snippet of that before, and it's really wonderful for you to retell that story in its elongated form. And you know, whenever you were telling that story, I sort of flashed to, you know, some resemblance of my own experience with cancer, but it was nowhere near as, I guess, as strenuous or as long as yours had been. But and at the same time, I think that like a very important factor is at what age you experienced it. And I think that's something that I'd love for you to dig a little bit deeper into, mate. I mean, as a 13-year-old boy, I want to understand, and I'm sure that you've had a lot of time to reflect upon the impact it has had on your life and shaping who you are. But yeah, I'd love for you to dive a little bit more into that, and you know, that particular experience, the experience of it as a 13-year-old, and how it has, I guess, shaped parts of who you are or who you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been incredibly formative, and I just want to take a moment to say I don't find there to be much. I don't find it useful to compare journeys. You know, when we're So when a cancer diagnosis is, you're thrown into a fight for your life, no matter who you are or what type of cancer. And there's many other conditions as well that have a similar effect. So, but the age was an interesting time of my life. You know, I was just out of year 7 at a new school, and you know, hit puberty a few months earlier. And suddenly there was the world of girls and, you know, women, and just I've had many people reflect to me that it's a bit of it's a challenging time for anyone, but going through cancer at that time, you know, if it's a time where we figure out who we are, how we fit in socially. And I'd say that's probably been one of my biggest challenges in life, and still to this day, because it's given me so many gifts of a very different perspective in life, and the resilience to manage any challenges that come my way, in terms of relating to others. You know, I have many memories of in high school after that, once I returned to high school, and I couldn't relate to any of the other kids at school. And so it was this feeling of like being an alien, because what they were talking about seemed so far from important to me, yet it was on repeat. You know, there was drama, there was gossip, there was all the things that are happening that are super interesting for when you're in it as a teenager. But then there was all of this stuff, and then there was me just like looking at what it means to be alive, and why did I survive when others have died, and just having, you know, reflecting on what does it mean? What do I do now? How do I live now? And then also I was quite self-conscious walking with a walking stick. You know, I have a clear memory of when I had my P's, and I drove to the shopping center one day, and it was pretty big for me to go to the shopping center by myself. And I walked into the shopping center. I was walking with my walking stick, and I felt really self-conscious. And then I see in the, you know, kind of walking towards me about 50 meters away, this old man with a walking stick and a carer. And as we got closer, it was like, the feeling in my body was like everything, I was so uncomfortable. And as we got closer, there was a moment of eye contact, and we had exactly the same walking stick. And looking back, I laugh, and I just send my younger self love and compassion. But at the time, it was a really distressing thing for me. And I ended up, you know, I walked past him, and then I did a U-turn, and I went back to my car, and I went home, and so there was a lot of those kinds of experiences where I felt myself dissociated from what was happening as a trend in the social groups around me. So that was incredibly formative, and the gifts of that perspective, you know, have, you know, continued to blossom. But I'd say that socializing and knowing where I fit in that world is still something that I grapple with, and I know that many people do. Yeah, trying to think of what other ways. I think the time when I found wheelchair tennis, you know, I mentioned that I had a bit of an identity crisis when I retired, and, you know, going through a kind of an experience like cancer, it leaves a mark. It leaves, you know, there's physical, there's emotional, there's all different kinds of things that we have to process to move on in an empowered way. And so at the time that I found wheelchair tennis, I was desperately searching for something to hold on to give me hope in life. And so when I retired from wheelchair tennis, it was like, it not only was the identity of tennis, but it was suddenly I had to deal with all the things that happened in that time that I was sick as well, because when I found tennis, there was all this stuff going on that I couldn't deal with, but I found tennis. So it was like, oh, I'm just going to focus all my energy on tennis and I'm not going to pay any attention to that. I'm just going to try and move on. And so the identity that freaked out when I retired from tennis was not just the tennis. It was also, there's all this stuff that has been left unprocessed that slowly bubbled up in terms of like, I started having flashbacks. I was having like almost like a PTSD response.
And what's your view on it now, mate? What's your perspective on that? Like looking back and given you, I think you said you've had about 2 years or so to sort of move through that and essentially process what was left unprocessed.
I found a compassion for myself and a tenderness within that I never had before. You know, I was really quite hard on myself as an athlete I had a massive drive to achieve, and in that I was really tough on myself mentally and physically. I pushed myself. And when I started going through this process and I realized that I was holding on to all this stuff that was, you know, kind of stored in my body, stored in my consciousness, and slowly peeling back layers. And I mean, the process isn't, I mean, I don't know what a complete process would be, but there's, you know, I'd say there's still a depth that is being uncovered within that process. But definitely a compassion for myself, and with that is a compassion for others, and an openness and a new level of feeling. So opening my heart to actually feeling. And it was only recently that I realized there was a part of my being that was so afraid of the cancer coming back that I self-sabotaged in a way that stopped me from fully expressing myself. And that realization was only two or three weeks ago, where I actually woke up from a dream with that knowing, because I've been really contemplating the areas of life where I don't feel fulfilled, I don't feel fully expressed and fully empowered. And when I feel into going into those spaces, feels like there's a block or a barrier. And since having that realization that, you know, the barrier is becoming less solid, there's more room for expansion, because I can see what the fear is. So it's a continuously evolving process, and through it I'm getting to know myself in a much deeper, much more comprehensive way, because I accept and am loving more parts of myself that were just locked up and that weren't in my conscious awareness before.
And what are some of those areas that you feel now? You know, I know it's really recent, 2 or 3 weeks, but what are some of those things? Because I can tell, Adam, that you know, even from a very early age, you've had this ability to kind of zoom out and see the situation that is happening, in your life from kind of outside eyes, it sounds like to me. You mentioned that when you were younger and the chemotherapy, it felt like, it was taking away part of yourself. And also when you went into tennis, you noticed that it brought a spark back to your life and you had something to live for. And they're all observations that you made of yourself. And it sounds like you're making them again now, or you have been the whole time, but these real recent ones in the last 2-3 weeks, what are some of those that have been expansive for you that you're interested in exploring that you haven't before?
Yeah, great question. It's really focused around creativity and expression of that creativity in many different ways. I think I've held myself back from following those moments of inspiration that would lead to creating something. And so I think that there's a lot that's, I don't have words for it because it's so new, but the feeling of allowing myself to enter into the process of creation is present now, whereas in the past it would have, it wasn't even a conscious thing. I would get distracted, or I would find something else to do, or I'd say, no, I don't have time for that. Or it was a very unconscious or subconscious form of sabotage in that area. And so since being able to see it, there's more of a willingness for me to lean into that space. And I mean, what that looks like practically is, just starting to write again, and to, write songs and play music. And there's a few of my chosen areas of creativity that I haven't made time for in the past, and I never quite knew how to make them fit into my life, and was waiting for them to, for inspiration to strike, and for me to suddenly write this amazing poem. And what I'm noticing now is that every day there's an opportunity for creation and creativity. There's this, it's an endless flow. And much like with Qi Gong, it's like the energy is flowing through. By doing my Qi Gong practice, I'm facilitating an increase and enhanced quality of the flow of energy in my body. And so by tapping into that creative energy, there's I'm just at the beginning of tapping into the potential that I feel, because I feel I've been practicing the cultivation of energy for many years now, so I feel like channeling that energy into creativity is and will be really powerful, especially as I really dedicate and set time towards allowing that to be expressed in my life and in the world.
Absolutely, man. And I think that you bring up a really important, I guess, line of inquiry there, in terms of how we often in modern times will sabotage ourselves from inquiring further and being curious and following the threads of curiosity. That may be the beginnings of creativity for each and every one of us, because of a plethora of different reasons, right? I mean, each of our lived experiences up until this point will be written by certain stories, and we're conditioned in certain ways to believe certain things and have different systems of belief. But those things can also, play a role in hampering or, freeing us to be able to do the things that perhaps we feel like we want to do. And I think that turning them into something, practical or tangible is this often an interesting barrier, because a lot of the things that we do from a creative standpoint, especially at the start, right, they don't necessarily make sense in the social norm of things, like you, journaling and poetry for me have been, beautiful ways for me to express myself. But do they make sense in terms of, stacking towards the economic goals of, being successful and things like this? Not necessarily. So that in itself can be a bit of a hamper. But what are the sorts of things that, proved to be, I guess, barriers for you? And I know that you mentioned some things around, fitting in socially and things like this. But what are some of the barriers that you faced? And again, what are some of the ways that you were able to overcome them for yourself?
Are you asking about barriers to creativity or just barriers?
Yeah.
It all comes down to my own mind. And I always told myself a story of being a sporty person, and that being a sporty person, I couldn't be a creative person, or I wasn't a creative person. I wasn't artistic. And yeah, I mean, I can trace that back to my childhood, when for whatever reason, I moved more towards sport, and yeah, my artistic side became shut down at some point. And who knows how, or who knows why. Sport has been an incredible outlet for me. But life is creative. Life is so much more than sport. And that's why I think I retired, was because once I started to see that the ceiling of what was possible for my life shattered when I did Kokoda. I never thought in a million years that I would be able to walk a track like that. And so there was like the ceiling shattered, and I entered the inquiry of, okay, what else is possible now? Because what I thought was my limitation, and I thought it was a solid limitation, is gone. And so it becomes infinite possibilities from that space. And at times I got really frustrated with myself for not being more creative or more inspired to create. And then I also looking at the stories that I hold, and the feelings towards creativity, and when I see someone else being creative, how that makes me feel versus other people. Some people, there's more triggering, like making me feel uncomfortable, and some people is more inspiring. And why is that the case? So really looking at how those elements of creativity make me feel. And then also recognizing it as a practice, as an art. There's dedication and time that needs to be spent, daily to become comfortable with anything like that. I know that from my days as an athlete. And yeah, so I've started the process, and I'm seeking support. I've approached an art therapist, just as a way to process what's happening in life and turn that into the act of creation, because my experience of life is so rich compared to what it used to be when I felt like I was numb and shut down for many years of my life, and compared to now, there's like a universe of feelings and thoughts and processes that are happening inside every single day. When I sit down to meditate, I'm like, what is, there's so much happening inside. So actually learning how to turn that into creation and art is one of the, I wouldn't say I've set a goal around it, but I have an intention for that process to become a daily part of my life.
One thing that I want to bring up from what you just mentioned was really interesting to me, and which is something Les has discussed before, which is the process of creativity and how it can be a process. And I'm really interested by that because it's one of those things that I think people feel like creativity is something that visits you, like it can come to you and then it leaves, as opposed to like a cultivated practice. So it's really interesting to me that you mentioned that, because I've heard musings of it from Les before. And I'd love to actually bring Les in and get his opinion on that, because I know it's something that he's quite adept at or focuses on a lot. So Les, are you able to like shed some light for us on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Adam, you hit on a lot of things there that it's totally spot on. I think that as you were talking about your approach as a professional athlete and how that may have turned you away from creativity in some way. And I don't believe it would have. Like, I mean, just as any practice that you engage into, you put the right level of dedication and discipline toward it, and there is the desired outcome, and the key word that you put behind that is intention, right? Whatever it is. I mean, it's funny how your story has turned out in a very in a different way to how you imagined it as a child. As a child, you wanted to be a professional athlete to represent Australia, and you did that. It just manifests in a different way, which is like kind of beautiful and kind of telling of how life kind of unfurls for you. That essence of what you wanted, it remained in spirit, but it just formed differently in the physical realm, right? Which is really cool. I find it's a great sort of way to, and a great example to sort of demonstrate that. But I guess in terms of like the art of practice and what you mentioned before, Shaun, about people thinking that that only certain people are blessed with the ability to be creative. I think that's a complete myth. Everyone has the capacity for creativity. I think creativity is a human capacity, but the difference really is whether you are dedicated to tuning into that and being aware to that and cultivating that and allowing that to flow through you and finding the right mediums for you to express that, right? Not everyone will express their creativity through the same mediums. Not all art is going to be hanging on the walls of the art gallery. Doesn't mean it's not art, doesn't mean it's not expression. But I think that, there's certain things out there that I guess are great proponents to telling us what practice and artistry and creativity are. There's no real destination to be reached in that way. I think it's in a book called Mastery, and I can't remember who the author is. It's not the Robert Greene version. It's another version of a book called Mastery that was written in the 90s. The author said that mastery is available to anyone who is willing to get onto the road of mastery and not only, walk the path, but stay on the path. And I think that's sort of the important part of it. It's not only about finding the right path for yourself, but being, comfortable with staying on it, being disciplined to stay on it, no matter what. And I think martial arts and, professional sports, it sort of teaches us a lot of these sorts of things in a particular way, in that, from the outside looking in, we sort of see that the goal is to reach the top, to get the trophy, to get the black belt, to get the championship ring, all that sort of stuff. But when you ask the people who have actually done that, that's not the goal at all. Their goal really is just to be, better than they were yesterday. And I think that's sort of the approach to creative energy, creative outlet, that you continually have the intention to, walk the path and cultivate that and allow it to sort of flourish the way it needs to. But yeah, love to get your thoughts as well, Adam.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with what you just shared, Leslie. Yeah, I was reflecting on when you said that I set my intention as a child to play for Australia, and then it manifested in a different way. I've reflected on that a lot in my life, and I suppose that's why I've taken, kind of 2 years before kind of choosing to study Chinese medicine, to see what I want to pursue with my life, especially after doing Kokoda as well, because that was another example of, okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, but set my intent and then it's done. And so it's knowing that about myself and about humans in general, when we set our mind to something and we take actions towards that, and we line up all the aspects of our being and our world to facilitate the expression of that intent into the world, then there's nothing we can't do. And that's the way I'm starting to approach creativity as well. Seeing the aspects of my being that are in the way of that manifesting in the world in the way that I would like it to be and to feel. And I'm not at the point of, it's not a daily practice for me yet, and that's okay. I'm in a massive stage of transition. First semester of a 4-year uni degree, and possibly do a master's after that. I'm a big proponent for being realistic in certain ways, and time management is one of those things. I have some daily practices that are almost non-negotiables. Every now and again, there's a day that I don't do a Qi Gong practice or I don't meditate. But even when I don't do that, there's some form of mindful breathing or mindful movement just throughout my day without a specific time to focus on it. But the breath itself is an act of creation, or transformation, with taking in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. And the process of that creates life and facilitates all the functions of our body. Look from the Chinese medicine perspective, the lungs are in charge of descending and dispersing the energy within the body, and so where the kidneys store our essence, our jing, and when the lungs breathe in, the kidneys draw on that energy, and that then disperses. And it's a continuous flow that with every single breath, and the act of, like anything, getting over the ego and the blockages to anything is an achievement itself. Sometimes just sitting down at the desk to study or to write, or sitting down in my chair to play guitar, which is something I love to do, but still some days it's not easy. And so I mean, from my days as an athlete, there was, you show up, and it's not to win the medal on that day, but I'm showing up to train and to improve, 0.0001% that day, to work on something. And I think that it's so easy to go through life without ever fully realizing what is meaningful to you. It's so easy never to take that time to actually shed the layers that are put onto you from society, from family, their values being put onto you that you think are your own. And unless you take that time to really shed that and figure out what do you value in life, you go through life thinking that what you value is what other people value. And just coming into that practice of, again, shedding even more, and coming into, I'm listening to a book right now called Essentialism, and just coming back to, okay, stripping back everything that's not essential, so that I can find out what is so important to me that I can't not do, and basing my life around those, because that's the most meaningful thing. And yeah, creativity feels so good to create, and to get what is inside kind of outside, in whatever form it takes. But if you want to be good at it, if you want to be good at anything, it takes a lot of time and consistency, and learning to work with momentum. And when the momentum is good, you're in some, you can find some incredible spaces within your own feelings and awareness. Hopefully I answered your question in that.
Absolutely you did, man. And I think that, one of the key things that I sort of come back to, and again, I think you painted a really like vivid picture for everyone, is this notion of essence, right? You talked about, again, back in the days whilst you were going through your cancer treatment, that you felt like you were lifeless, and you look back at the photos and you look like a ghost. And there was certain things that brought that spark of life, that essence back. And I think that it's a beautiful way to sort of describe this guiding force for each and every individual, in life, in terms of what that creative output will manifest into, or what its starting point, essentially, right? Sort of like a compass. Like, I totally agree with you that, whatever we sort of focus on, we can achieve as people. But I think that, and going back to that quote from the book from Mastery, right? The hardest thing is staying on that path, especially if it's something that you don't believe in your heart, and that again is that essence in my mind. We can look out into the world, and it's so easy to, like, just jump on social media and see what we quote unquote want to achieve and be and have, but a lot of the time, like, we don't actually want that stuff. It's not something that sort of resonates with us. It's not, it doesn't spark something within us. It's not the essence that is held within us. It's different for everyone. And like, when you were talking about how clearly you sort of set an intention as a kid and what you want to be, like, a professional athlete who represents Australia. I look back at my own life as a child, and I don't think I ever had that, and that's why throughout a lot of my formative years, I was lost, and I was jumping from identity to identity, just trying to find something that I believed in. And it was only when I had my own, battle with cancer that I dedicated my time and effort to really finding out what that is and rediscovering, the true essence within myself. So I think that's a really important thing. Like, the essence is one of these things that really, and to use like some of the words that you mentioned before, Adam, it's the things that really allows us to empower ourselves to remain on that path of pursuing creativity and walking down that path, and making things and creating things with our hands and making things tangible, express them externally. It's sort of like there's this old saying that the gods they smile at us when we make things with our hands, and I think it's like sort of indicative of what we're sort of put here to do, to find our own essence and sort of birth that into existence, into some physical or tangible way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people, some people, spend a lot of their lives waiting for that to hit them. And when I was in the peak of my career, just throughout my tennis career, that so many people that said like, "Oh, you're so lucky to have found that thing that you absolutely love." And I was like, and I knew it. I knew how lucky I was, because I was incredibly sporty and competitive, and so that I was good at it. And it was a way that I could give everything I had to it, and I also received a lot of value from the world. And when I retired, I started to see that, okay, how I have received value and had my needs met in the past, now I had to find a new way. And I'd still probably say I'm on that journey of rediscovering what is the essence that's going to thread its way through the next period of my life. And it really feels like that there's a journey of discovery. There's an element of seeking and non-seeking in that path, because there's always things that we don't need to go looking for. But then I've had a taste of that passion for my everyday life, and I know that passion is something that can be cultivated and grown, rather than just inherent in someone. So yeah, finding that, and yeah, heading in the direction of what inspires me to find that essence again.
Yeah. And I feel like you sort of described, the journey of life in that little nugget, you know what I mean? Like, it's not so much something that is a period in our lives per se. We'll find that when we reflect back, each sort of little, I guess, period of our lives, where however we want to categorize them, they do go through these types of, journeys and evolutions, and just like the want to discover something new for ourselves. And I feel like that's going to be the way it is until the day that we pass. So yeah, I think that's a really nice way and place for us to maybe cap off the conversation and leave with our audience. And for them to for something to ponder and chew on, you know, with regards to essence and what that might mean for them. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us on the show, Adam. Really appreciated you know, your wisdom and insights, and you know, sharing your incredible story. I'd love to, you know, give you the opportunity to get, you know, share with our audience where they can find you if they wanted to get in touch and, you know, maybe have a chat with you or anything else, mate. So
yeah, thanks so much for having me and facilitating this conversation. I love sharing that story, and I hope the people listening have taken something, one thing from it. And if you want to get in touch, Instagram or Facebook, and just my name, Adam Kellerman. I'm moving into a period where I'm moving away from social media, but I will still be available, at least for the next little while.
for sure, man. We'll add those links into the show notes, and you know, if people want to reach out, they can. And I'm definitely confident that people would have got something out of this conversation. Shaun, where can people find you, mate?
Yep, easiest place to find me is on Instagram. So it's Shaun_Coop, SHAUN_COOP. And people can also find out more about what we do together, Les, at true-north.co. If you have any interest in finding out more about what we do there, just head over to that website. And how about you, Les? Where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me at my website, findingspace.co, as well as the socials. Instagram and Facebook is also at findingspace.co.
And again, Adam, just want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your story and, you know, the most recent developments as well, which is so different to the life that you've led before. I think it's really exciting, and looking forward to seeing what, you know, this creative process yields for you.
Thanks, Shaun. It's been a pleasure.
And if you're listening still, thank you for joining us today. And we ask that you just share this episode with one other person. That's how we grow the podcast. It's a humble request, a little nugget. Any questions you think might provoke some thought in some other people that you came across in this conversation. It'd be awesome if you shared it with one other person. And until next time, guys, thanks for joining us.
See you guys.